Ah, there you are again. Since I was last with you, I've been exploring in great depth, and sometimes with the aid of a magnifying glass, Dickens's personal favourite amongst his novels. And for the past 3 years, I've been writing a book about it, David Copperfield Unbound, published in March 2025 by Routledge. I take as my starting point the fact that Dickens had no clear conception of what he was going to write when he sat down in his Devonshire Terrace study at the end of February 1849. First he thought of writing a picaresque in the vein of Tom Jones, but realised that that wouldn't work and abandoned it. A week later, however, he came up with the name David Copperfield and set to work on the novel that would become an in-depth exploration of the author's own psyche through the persona of the I-narrator David Copperfield and his close associates, Aunt Betsy, Mr. Dick, Steerforth, Uriah Heep and Agnes. Aunt Betsy, for example, wants to know why Peggotty is called Peggotty. Well, as Dickens made up the name, he clearly knew, but doesn't reveal it. My second chapter, however, does, and what emerges is a great surprise, if not an electric shock. Speaking of electricity, David Copperfield himself and his nemesis Uriah Heep are both electrically charged and derive their onomastic being in part from both Frankenstein and his monster and the recent scientific discoveries of Humphrey Davy and Michael Faraday. Here's another clue from the text. Why are there mentions of elephants 12 times in total throughout the text from page 2 right through to chapter 51 when, as far as I can see, there are no elephants anywhere on the horizon? And why, in particular, does Mr. Omer repeatedly refer to his pretty granddaughter as a little elephant? Attempting to resolve that particular mystery takes us to the heart of Dickens's creative process. And it took me to Great Yarmouth, where you can still to this day find the little elephant that inspired him, and I have no doubt, which will become, in the near future, a place of pilgrimage for Dickens fans. That quite amazing story is the subject of my first chapter, which, by the way, I will shortly be adapting as a podcast. As well as following in Dickens's footsteps to Great Yarmouth, which he visited for the only time in his life on January the 9th, 1849, my research took me on several occasions to London, to Broadstairs and to the Isle of Wight, where he composed very important sections of this novel, and to Rome to visit the graves of the poets Keats and Shelley, whose works provide another important but previously unrecognised key component of the symbolic scaffolding which underpins this novel. Perhaps most intriguingly of all, I pose the question as to who was the reader, not a generic reader, but the reader whom Dickens loved in 1850 and to whom he effectively dedicated the novel, but no longer loved in 1867 when he came to rewrite the preface. For that startling revelation, you'll need to travel with me to Sandon Hall in Staffordshire and stand in front of this painting by Angelica Kauffman entitled The Three Graces, a painting that Dickens himself saw many times in a house off Piccadilly, now sadly the entrance to Green Park Underground Station. For the resolution of that mystery, you'll have to wait until chapter 11. Unless you can't resist the temptation and want to know who done it, or, in this case, who didn't do what. As a coda to that chapter, I argue that if Dickens had been free to follow his impulses and the deepest current of his mind, then Britain in the second half of the 19th century might have become a very different country. Well, I hope that I've whetted your appetite sufficiently for you to splash out on a paperback or a Kindle version of my new book, and please do recommend it to your university, school or local library who might just be persuaded to purchase a more durable hardback copy. And with that, I invite you to read and enjoy David Copperfield Unbound. I had a great time writing it, and I have no false modesty in asserting that it's one of the most important contributions to Dickens studies in the past, let me see now, 175 years.